The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello everybody, it's Scott Mason, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting next to me today in the front seat for the second episode in a row is Gregory Lopez. Gregory is the co-author of A Handbook for New Stoics. In the last episode, Gregory and I discussed the difference between Stoicism and other philosophical systems, as well as the modern self-help movement. We discussed dealing with moral outrages committed by others, and what sort of emotional reactions can help make us better people. And finally, we discussed the ethical implications of forgetfulness. We have an exciting and extraordinarily stimulating hour ahead. Gregory, welcome to the show. Gregory, you talked a little bit about your religious background in terms of the 2 Christian churches that you were given a choice of becoming involved in, and then Buddhist exploration. Talk to us a little bit about your own journey and how you ended up so involved with Stoicism and what's kept you so involved.
So I guess my journey was I got first into Buddhism because there was a subsidized mindfulness-based stress reduction course. So it was stress at the end of the day. And at the same time, I had a friend who was doing a master's in Buddhist studies. And I always thought Buddhism was kind of like, you had to believe in reincarnation, and I didn't buy that stuff. And so whatever, it's fine. But the mindfulness-based stress reduction course coupled with my friend convinced me that there was a lot of practicality to Buddhism. That introduced into me some volunteer spirit stuff. And also I was struggling a little bit with where I was going in life as well. And so I started volunteering and ultimately became president of an organization, Smart Recovery, New York City, that teaches cognitive behavior therapy to people with addictive behaviors of all sorts, whether they involve a substance or don't involve a substance. So I learned some CBT from there. And then I learned that Stoicism influenced cognitive behavior therapy. So I had a background interest in philosophy. I read some Seneca during college, but I didn't know too much about it. And so I took a look at that. And I actually found some people on the internet who were trying to practice Stoicism in the modern world. And it didn't really click for me that Western philosophy was practical in any way. But then I saw people trying to do it. So I got into Stoicism. But the thing is, that was still on the internet. And the internet is great for bringing people with rare preferences and rare desires together.
I think there's actually a lot of you when there isn't still.
Yeah. I'm not alone. I'm not a freak. So the internet, while it has its downsides, it also has its upsides. And during this time, it was Stoicism. And so people were doing it on the internet. And I've always been well, maybe not always, but mostly been a little bit of an internet skeptic, in that people on forums, and even especially like social media nowadays, it's text on a screen. They're not human beings per se who you're talking to. And so our monkey brains kind of turn off, and it can turn us into nastier people to some degree when we're interacting on social media. And it's just a context issue. And so I have less faith in social media as a form of communication and community building. So in 2013, I decided to found the New York City Stoics, mainly as a way to hold myself accountable, to learn more about Stoicism and maybe start practicing it if I was interested in it. So it was like an accountability metric. I was like, I know about myself that if I am accountable each month to people to answer some basic questions, I'll probably do better, and there'll be some eyeballs on me. So maybe I'll be an more okayish me person. And so I did that, and it kind of picked up from there. Then my co-author, Massimo Pigliucci, had a midlife crisis and came to New York City Stoics one day after discovering Stoicism. He's a professional philosopher. So from there, I just wanted to have my little reading group, but he published books and stuff. So he was a go-getter. So he recommended that we do Stoic Camp New York, which we've held for every year except during the pandemic years. We held it in 2020 online, and we canceled 2021, and 2022 is still up in the air. We prefer it much in person, and we're going to see how things go there. But we did Stoic Camp New York. And from that, we had a whole bunch of Stoic exercises that we took from the literature, just a big list. And we're like, well, there's no Stoic practice book out there. There are books that introduce Stoicism and give a few practices, but we have tons of material here, and there's nothing that's going through like how to try out practices. So we decided, in the kind of spirit of workbooks, like self-help workbooks and cognitive behavioral workbooks, to kind of create a handbook for new Stoics and put that out there. In the interim, we also brought a conference, Stoicon, from London, where it was founded, to New York City in 2016, and started rotating it around the world. And it also was in Toronto as well as Athens afterwards. And now it's currently online. And that's how I got on board with the nonprofit Modern Stoicism. And because I was doing New York City Stoics at the time, a couple of other people found me and contacted me early in the day and wanted to form a Stoic fellowship where people can get supported in forming their own local in-person groups in order to try to form some sense of Stoic community. And so we incorporated in Minnesota as a nonprofit in 2017, and we are still going. We're an all-volunteer organization that just collects some basic donations to cover website costs and perhaps hire outside help on occasion if we need it. But everybody there is a volunteer, and that brings me to where I am today. I'm still doing New York City Stoics, still on some of the boards and committees that I mentioned. And I'm also doing a website that will do some targeted Stoic practice courses, stoicmissingpieces.com, because I still think there are some very specific areas that aren't covered about Stoicism and how to practice it. And so these are going to be targeted courses, not generally for general audience. It's going to be, again, the whispering to a whispering to the 5 people in the room of 10 million, but I'm fine with that. And they're just going to be kind of targeted courses for things that are buried in this ancient Stoic literature and some academic stuff that I've seen that is very suitable for practice, but is not being put out there more broadly.
I'm so blown away. Isn't it amazing, just as an aside, how life is sometimes? There you are just looking for a little accountability group, and look at where your life has taken you. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Yeah. I think a couple of people have asked me like how to get started on a book. And I was like, I don't know, like latch onto somebody's published stuff before I get there. But I didn't start out. I didn't start out with any of this. And so like all of these things, I mean, that's a Stoic lesson, like all these outcomes are externals that I didn't really set out to do. It's just kind of like effort and showing up and also being interested in this stuff, because if you're like doing stuff to grind so that you're successful, like, I don't know, that burns me out. I just want to do what I enjoy. And that's kind of what I do right now. I thought about on an occasion, like if I won the lottery, what would I change? It's like, well, I just put the rest and stuff into my retirement and medical emergency fund and then keep on doing what I'm doing because I'm living a okay-ish life externally, but all of that's due to luck too. I don't think I played a huge role in any of that. And that's a big Stoic lesson, is that the stuff that people generally go after and that people bring up to be proud of, like, oh, I published a book. It's like, it was mostly luck. And I couldn't control that. And there maybe are unlucky things that have happened to me and knee injuries and stuff that have but that's also luck too. Like, so at the end of the day, all those things that people go after, including myself a lot of the time, just all comes down to luck. And that's not the main focus of what I think is going to leave a flourishing life. Like, one of the things that brought me into Stoicism was like going through some anxiety and depression stuff and getting better without Stoicism with the traditional methods. And then realizing that I got better through a mix of traditional methods and luck, that through like getting out of stuff and making my external life better, I was then happier in the traditional sense. But I was disturbed by the fact that luck played such a large role in my mental world. And I wanted to lessen that impact.
The role of luck, first of all, it goes as to one of the threads throughout your book, and other Stoic writings and popularizers focus on this, which is minimizing the self as an agent with regards to the circumstances in our lives. Because I think about this, what you're saying, we can forget it quite easily because we live in a society that from a historical perspective is historically free. But if, for instance, you were a slave somewhere in ancient Rome or in a slave-holding society that was relatively modern, right, you could have been the best writer in the world. You weren't writing a book. Luck, accident of birth, or accident of circumstance may have made that an impossibility or not. Even exposure to Stoicism itself goes as to luck. And I personally find that refreshing because I do believe that overemphasis of the role of the individual will leads to, now I'm not someone who's obsessed with happiness, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm not someone at the same time who seeks misery, nor am I someone who is profoundly unsympathetic to those who suffer from it. And I can't help but feel that this preeminence of ego-driven explanations for life circumstances leads to misery.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, yeah, it also depends on kind of what you think the ego is and your conception of this self. Like there are ways to kind of pull yourself out of the situation. And that's one solution. I would say one framing of Stoic thing is actually strengthening yourself and bringing yourself more into it, but understanding what you are. That there's actually a bit of like heavy metaphysical philosophy behind Stoicism that's often lost in the popular perceptions of it. But a lot of the Stoics really did have an idea of what the self was. And they thought that a very tiny part of our mind is really what we have control over. It's just essentially our goals, our things that we want to do, and our conscious thoughts. That's all we have full control over. And so the Stoic strengthening of the self would be focusing on those three things that are under your complete control: your goals in life, your goals to act, and your conscious thoughts, and trying to just constantly focus on those alone and not worry about the outcomes. Some people think that others' opinions of them are part of their self. Some people think that the body and the flesh is part of yourself, and then you watch it gain some weight during COVID or get older or get sick or things like that. And then it's like, oh, I'm getting sick. Well, as long as my mind is still there, I could make myself sick or well by practicing philosophy. So framing it, yeah. In the traditional conceptions of the self, I would agree that we bring ourselves too much into a situation, often to our detriment. But in some other framings of the self, perhaps if you understand what we are and what kind of beings we are in general, I think we can make ourselves stronger by bringing it in.
One of the most interesting parts of the book, from my perspective, that all of that goes into, by the way, is the discussion and practice exercises with regards to pain itself. And that itself, and I'd like to just hear some thoughts from you about that in a second, but the question really I have goes as to a word that I've become obsessed with since reading your book. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what it is and how it's relevant to this whole discussion. The word is indifferent. What is an indifferent? I'm seeing indifference everywhere I go now. Why? Why do you think I'm so obsessed with this?
I don't know. We've talked a few times, but I don't know you too well, so I can't get into your psyche. I mean, if you want to lay on a couch and I can be a big psychoanalyst for a while, we could get to that. Yeah, indifferent is it's kind of the key to Stoic practice is realizing what doesn't make a difference in making a life that's worthwhile. And so indifferent is a hard thing for people to grasp because it sounds like one should not care about certain things. And this leads to common questions in Stoicism like, oh, why should I bother in being politically active if, politics and externals are indifferent? Why should I care about justice in the world when I can't control it? So let's not care. And that is not what the Stoics meant by indifferent. Instead, an indifferent is something that is in your life that will not necessarily make it better and could make it worse. That's all it is. And so a lot of things that people consider good, such as health and wealth, are indifference to the Stoics. And that seems shocking to a lot of people that, of course I need to be healthy to be happy. Of course I need at least some amount of money to be happy and things like that. But if you understand the argument, I think it makes a little more sense. So for instance, if you take two people and if you think like health and wealth and influence are good things that will make everybody's life better and the world better. If everybody was healthy, wealthy, and popular, wouldn't the world just be great? Well, maybe not. So take two examples of Adolf Hitler and Malala Yousafzai. If you had a magic wand that you could wave at Hitler during the 30s and 20s, would you want to make him wealthier, healthier, and very influential or not? And then if you had a magic wand and could wave it at Malala, would you want to make her more influential and wealthy? Well, if we think about it, Hitler's probably going to be doing some bad things down the road. And so he's going to put that health, wealth, and popularity to poor use. It's going to harm the world. And also it wound up harming himself. He wound up shooting himself in a bunker. Didn't turn out too well because he turned people against himself. Whereas Malala is trying to be an advocate for girls and women across the world right now. And so she could put those things to use. And so that's why these things are indifferent, because health can make you harm yourself or others if you use it poorly. Whereas if you used it well, then you can help yourself and others. And same with wealth and popularity and a lot of the things that people go after. And so what's the difference between Hitler and Malala Yousafzai? Well, it's their character. And so it's themselves, it's who they are. And so the Stoic argument of these things being indifferent means that anything that comes into your life through luck can only be put to good use if you have a good enough character, if you are brave enough, if you think about what's really good in the world, if you care enough about others and you care enough about yourself in certain ways, then you can put things to good use. If you don't have a good character, you can harm yourself with these things that people consider good. So it's a necessary precondition to try to be a better person. And that's not the end of the story, because anything that happens in our lives through luck can be put to improve our character. So we build a lot more. We build up ourselves a lot more if we focus on our character in any given situation. Did I speak well today? And did the podcast go well? Well, I can put that to use for my character by not trying to puff myself up. Did I speak poorly and stumble on myself and confuse a lot of people, or half the people asleep right now? I could put that to use for my character by saying, well, I could try better next time. And also what other people's reactions are out of my complete control. I did the best I can, I think. And maybe I could learn for the future and improve, but other people's impressions of me are ultimately not under my complete control. What is under my complete control? My goals, my thoughts, and my immediate actions. And that's about it. So character is kind of what's important there.
We'll move now into some of the core pillars of the book. 3 types of disciplines were generally categorized within the book, and then there were sub-exercises and sub-discussions beneath all of them. The first was the discipline of desire. Second, discipline of action. Third, discipline of assent. Can you explain what each of those are and why those have meaning for anyone that's interested in learning more about Stoicism?
Sure. So this is the Stoic training program that came about from the Stoic teacher Epictetus. It doesn't seem to appear earlier in the literature, but I think it's the best framework for actually practicing Stoicism. And it's a 3-phase training program that is supposed to build on itself. You actually start with one, move on to the second, and then do the third finally, according to the program. And so the first discipline is the discipline of desire. And the main goal of this discipline is to mute all your desires for external things, and any practice that serves desires and trying to kind of push them down and make them a little lighter is in service of this discipline. And alternatively, you also want to shift your aversions, things that you don't like. Mm-hmm. And the way Epictetus frames it is a little mystifying at first. He says you're supposed to transfer your aversions from externals to internals. And what that's a fancy way of saying is stop giving a shit about external stuff and outcomes, and instead focus on your reactions to them. Care not about what happens, care about how you react. That's it. And so instead of being nervous that I'll come off poorly in the podcast, I should be nervous that I think such thoughts in the first place and work to change those thoughts. So that's the kind of shift there. And so it's called the discipline of desire, and sometimes as shorthand for desire and aversion, because you focus on your goals in life, what you want to get, your desires, and what you want to avoid, your aversions. And that's how you practice with them, by tempering all desires and by shifting your things you don't like from externals to internals. And any practice that serves those results is within the discipline of desire. This first step is what a lot of people think Stoicism is, and that's the beginning and end of it, because the discipline of desire's goal is to temper your emotions, a specific subset of emotions that are called passions in the Stoics. And the goal of Stoic practice, a perfect Stoic would eliminate all passions. So passions are a kind of emotion, but they have two components to them. They're not every single kind of emotion. They take over your mind and push reason to the side. They justify themselves. An example of a passion could be righteous anger, because the anger takes over and tells you that you should get revenge against this person and you should feel good about it because they deserve it.
Up again.
And yeah, anger is a big thing. I mean, Seneca wrote a whole book on it, and Medea, that was her jam at the end, and that was the tension that was there. So and Epictetus actually pointed out that Medea was kind of like semi in control. It was an interesting thing. She kind of pushed it down, and she was able to, showed resilience in some ways. So that's what makes Epictetus's take on Medea so interesting. But going back to the discipline of desire. So the goal there is to get a hold of your emotions, these specific emotions called passions. And the reason for it is not to feel good. A lot of people just completely whiff on this and miss out. There's a very specific reason why the Stoics want to eliminate emotions. It's because these emotions called the passions. It's because they want us to be the best human beings possible. And they think human beings have two essential character traits that are essential to being a human being in the first place. The first is being rational. We are beyond any other animal that's out there able to think abstractly and use language. And these passions push reason to the side. We cannot reason when we're in a passion. And so it makes us literally less human when we're doing these kinds of things. Epictetus had a great story.
And that's quite a statement. I just want us to I don't want to interrupt you, and I'm sorry about that, but that's actually, and I remember that in the book, or something said to that effect. That's a powerful statement. Could you just say it again?
Yes, that these passions, the subset of emotions, make us less human.
It's worth hearing. It's worth for at least me taking it in, because it can be fun or can feel gratifying to let those passions take over, especially if it's anger. Anyway, I interrupted. Go back. I thank you for your patience with me.
Sure. So that's one characteristic of being human is rationality, and passions push reason to the side and so make us less human. The second characteristic is that we're social. You throw a human naked in a forest and say, good luck, buddy. They're probably not going to do too well. The things that humans do well, we do better when we work together. We have societies where together we can build rocket ships and go to the moon, and we can help each other out and give each other's funds or emotional support when needed. But humans on their own don't do that. And they don't do well. They don't become fully human. And we see this, in raising children, even from an early age. If you don't give children nurture or language, they won't become rational. You get language from your environment. You don't invent your language whole cloth. Language is a social act. And so humans need to be social, and humans are excellent at rationality, ideally. And so the goal of Stoic practice is to become better at being pro-social and become better at rationality. And that makes us more human and the best human beings that we can be. The goal of the discipline of desire is to temper these passions so that we could become better humans more generally, not to feel better, but to become better. And that's a critical difference that the kind of basic life hack version of Stoicism really misses. And this is only the first step in Stoicism, because then you're not done if you've gotten some hold on the passions. The goal of this is to clear the way for the next discipline. Once you get okay at this kind of stuff and tackle the main passions that you have, and it's a dialogue between the disciplines to some degree, but it's also roughly linear, at least like a spiral. So you get your passions under control by practicing that kind of stuff. Then at least a better. And then you go on to the discipline of action. And that's where the ethics comes into play. The discipline of action has two main goals. It's to act more intentionally and to act more pro-socially. And so the reason why the discipline of desire and getting a hold of these passions comes before the discipline of action, in Epictetus's words, he says, you may have noticed when I described the discipline of desire that there was an asymmetry going on between desires and aversions. They seem like two sides of the same coin, stuff you want and stuff you don't want. But Epictetus doesn't give the same advice for both. He says to dampen desires as much as you can, but he says transfer aversions from externals to internals, what your mind's doing. Why is there the asymmetry? Epictetus gives an answer for this. He says you're not ready at this first stage to desire what is desirable. If you don't have a hold of your passions to some degree, you're not ready to be ethical, because these strong emotions will push reason to the side and turn us against each other. If you don't have a basic grasp on it, at least, not saying perfect, but at least a basic grasp, then you can't be ethical. It's better to work on yourself earlier on than to jump right into the ethics and work on the major weaknesses. Epictetus gives the example of passions getting in the way. And one of my favorite stories from him is he's giving a lecture to his students, and he is giving some things called Stoic paradoxes. Paradox in Greek literally means like against common doxa, common beliefs. So he's telling a story. He's giving these Stoic paradoxes to his students, and he's like, only the Stoic sage can be a true friend. Only the perfect Stoic can actually be a friend. And only the perfect Stoic can actually love. And the student raises their hand and says, what are you talking about, Epictetus? I have lots of friends. We go out to parties, we hang out together, we have a good time. And like, I have friends. And I'm just a beginner here. Like, what's up with that? And Epictetus is like, well, you do have friends in a sense. You're friendly like puppies are friendly. And the student is like, yeah, exactly. We have a great time. We roll around and play. Like, what is there else to friendship? And Epictetus is like, okay, you're like puppies, but what happens if the puppies get a little hungry? Now, what if I keep them in a pen and throw some meat into the pen? Now, how friendly are you? Because they have desires. They have hunger for externals. They then snip at each other and tear each other apart if they're hungry enough. So that's how we are with friends. That's how friendly you are. And that's why the sage can only be the true friend, because they will be a friend no matter what. But us, he gives examples of, your brother doesn't do something you like. Your father doesn't leave you an inheritance that you wanted. Your son doesn't behave as you want. Your partner doesn't has annoyances. Then we turn against other people. And so and passions are what lead to that. That's why the discipline of desire and trying to get a hold of emotions is so important for Stoics, because otherwise we're just puppies who will snap at other people and will tear each other apart if the correct environmental circumstances come into play. And Stoicism is going to say, no, I'm going to try my best to not let environment dictate how good of a person I am, and I'm going to do it no matter what. non-perfect Stoics like myself will fail constantly, but the goal is to try to get better, or at least want to get better. So that leads to the discipline of action, which is about ethics. Now you're ready for ethics, or at least starting with the ethics.
Right.
The third...
No, that's okay. I was just saying like, all right, like...
So the third discipline is meant for advanced people who have gotten some basic hold of passions as well as ethics. And it's the discipline of assent. And it actually introduces very little new topics. You still work with your actions and you still work with your passions, but you do it at a much more fine-grained level of paying attention to your moment-to-moment experiences and thoughts and trying to cut them off at the pass. So in a practical level, the difference is like, for instance, if you're practicing the discipline of desire and you get grumpy when you're hungry, a practice in the discipline of desire would be to intentionally be hungry for a while, but also watch your mind and make sure that you try to mitigate your anger during that time. That could be a practice. And this is a planned ahead kind of thing. Like today I'm going to fast and I'm going to do my best to not be snippy, and I'll have reminders. I'll put Post-it notes around, like don't be snippy, have my watch go off at random intervals saying, oh, don't be snippy or whatever. It's a conscious forethought practice. The discipline of assent would do something similar, but you don't practice it necessarily. You don't plan out a practice. You go about your day and you try to catch your mind going in that direction and work with that as it goes. So it's much more fine-grained in looking at your upcoming, the thoughts that arise and trying to work with them on the fly. And that's why it's an advanced practice, because it requires you being on your toes and watching your mind. So that's the general progress. And although it's not a completely straight line, Epictetus does recommend that you do at least okay in getting the big passions in your life under control before moving on to ethics, and then doing okay-ish and being a little bit better in the ethics stuff. But then you can kind of go about your life and keep a watch on your mind, because now you're ready. And that's the entire thing in a nutshell. That's the entire Stoic path of practice.
Extraordinarily well explained, I've got to say. Why did Stoicism fade into the background over time?
So I guess nobody really knows, but my best guess is there are lots of theories. I think that there was like Christianity and Neoplatonism first, and then Christianity in the Roman Empire just got more popular. They were more appealing to the people for various reasons. Neoplatonism, they both serve similar purposes. And also Christianity did start incorporating both Neoplatonism and Stoicism into its own doctrines. And so we saw Christianity absorb some of what was going on. So I think that the popularity of Christianity in the Roman Empire, coupled with Christianity's ability to absorb some of the stuff, and then ultimately sort of capturing power. That's a complicated story. I don't think there was any massive power plays, and it was a slow process. But the Christianity also ultimately taking over the Roman Empire, and then the Western Europe played a role in philosophy's decline. And you see little spikes throughout history, like certain emperors, when they became Christian, wanted to suppress the pagan philosophies and things like that. I think that played a role, but I don't think that's a complete story. So I think consciousness shifted to a more religious aspect that incorporated the ethical and training components that made those philosophies interesting. And it kind of served all purposes. And it wasn't until then, because like I said, I think earlier today, religion and philosophy were kind of separated. Like philosophers had different views of gods and stuff, but at the end of the day, you go and do your sacrifice to Zeus or whatever, and you do the state religious kind of stuff. And so they were different roles. And it wasn't until Christianity started absorbing it where ethics and religion and politics all got kind of mushed into this one-stop shop for everything. And so I guess painting with a broad brush and stating that I'm uncertain about it, that's my basic feel of how it faded, is that ultimately Christianity got more popular and absorbed the useful things that people found useful from the other philosophies, along with a touch of, or little spikes of suppression along the way.
Well, and the reason why I asked that question, and thank you for such a nuanced answer, by the way, is that another guest on this show, an ethicist by the name of Christopher Gilbert, he had a discussion with me about how major changes in social paradigms, such as emergences of massive new technologies or shifts in social hierarchies or a whole other host of things, could and usually would require the holders of the ethical keys to power within a given society to increase their ethical capacity, so to speak, to deal with these changes or else risk dying out. And going back to the top of the hour or the top of the episode, when we talked about the silent revolution, one with that thinking in mind could argue that we are in an era of such dramatic, specifically technological, but also sociological or economic shifting, that the old ethical vanguards, these monotheistic religions that are dominating the world, right, the Western world at least, Islam and Christianity, could adapt, as it sounds like they did when the Stoicism as a dominant, or when Stoicism as a dominant force began to gradually become less out there, or less of a, it wasn't something that emperors, for instance, were writing about, or they die. Either they incorporate the changes and build their capacity, or they fade away. The reason why I raise that point is Stoicism is even further in the past than these doctrines which themselves replace Stoicism. And so what makes us think that Stoicism could have any value as ethical paradigms or as sociological, technological, cultural modalities shift to be applicable anywhere ever again?
Right. So I guess part of it, I think, is the proof is in the pudding, that because of Stoicism's influence and some of its key core doctrines of its effect on cognitive behavior therapy, I think we have some good idea that some of these things that Stoicism does work in terms of the discipline of desire and passions, at least. And then we could take a look at some ancient examples and see that some people tended to lead pretty interesting lives and who were socially engaged under Stoicism. And then we could take a look at the modern world and see it, quote unquote, work as well. At the same time, we could take a look at the theory and see that it kind of makes some sense and has some concordance with modern science and modern understandings, although perhaps not completely. So I think based on those things, I think there's at least a hope of Stoicism being able to work in the modern world. But at the same time, I think that there should be some uncertainty there, that we don't have as good of an idea. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure creatine works for muscle strength training better than I think. I'm more confident of that than that Stoicism will work for everybody in certain terrains, because there's better evidence out there for it. So, but at the same time, I still have some hope, and I'd rather have my soul be stronger than my muscles be stronger. And so I think it's worth me spending a little more time training, or at least if I go to the gym, which I used to a lot more than I do, but pandemic times, then at least I could train my mind while I'm training my body in the process.
That may just be the quote of the day, by the way. Now, going back to the ancient Greeks, let's take a visit to the oracle. If we adopted Stoicism en masse, let's say we do in the future, what will our culture and our society look like?
Well, first I have to inhale some ethylene, so excuse me while I get ethylene. Okay. Well, if we're going to do the full Delphic experience,
right, exactly.
Yeah, and then I can say something cryptic like a great change is afoot, and then you can, and then whatever happens will be right. So I prefer to go that route, but I guess I don't have any ethylene on me, so I guess I'll have to. I think that at the end of the day, I think that Stoicism will change the lives of some people on a local level if they pick it up, and it'll improve the lives of some people around, like families and friends, and people will make a bigger difference in the world. At the end of the day, I think the most likely outcome is the most likely outcome that throughout a lot of history, that maybe Stoicism won't be picked up by a lot of people, and it may die out again. And I think in terms of compromising some basic principles, like between Stoicism dying out again and Stoicism being turned into a life hack that makes factory workers feel a little bit more happy in the smiley sense, but still living lives that are painful in a lot of other ways, then I'd rather have Stoicism die out. Because I think the power really is in that it tries to make us better human beings. And if it does happen to have widespread acceptance, then that's great, although I'm doubtful of that. And I don't think that's the main goal. At the end of the day, I'm not sure that there's anything that will totally make the world universally a better place, full stop, that will have universal adoption and won't have unintended side effects. So one of the ways in which I differ from the ancient Stoics, one of the many ways, is that the ancient Stoics really thought that this was a philosophy that was crafted toward human nature, that human nature was a thing, and this was the most well-suited philosophy for humans in general. I do think that people can have reasonably different goals of where they want to go in life, whether I don't know if there's any principled way to argue against somebody who wants to eliminate mental pain. It's like, no, that's the wrong goal and you should go for something else. I don't think there's any way to do that. And so my hope is that people maybe more generally at least start thinking about consciously how the lives that they want to craft, the kind of what they want to paint on their canvas of life. And that may lead to things besides Stoicism, and may include a few more people with Stoicism, but I'm under no, to lay my epistemic cards on the table, I'm under no delusion that me or Stoicism is necessarily going to change the world, and I suspect it won't overall. And I'm fine with that.
But I can tell you this, that for myself, your book actually has changed my life. I look at things differently. I process things differently. And you're right, I may be that extraordinarily small minority, and someone who is watching or listening to this podcast may be in a position where they choose to also join this small majority that feels like we're everybody in the world. But I've got to say, for a book to have that sort of impact on my life, that feels, for what it's worth, and I know feelings may be indifference that we prefer or don't prefer, I preferred having had that change. And I thank you for that. How can people find out more about you, your activities, the things that you lead, and the book itself? You
can probably the best thing is to come have coffee with me in person, but that's probably not going to happen because I'm not on the internet too much. I do have if you could follow me on Twitter, but I tweet like once every 2 months. So besides that, I have a personal website that just tells you a little bit more about myself and also has a contact form if you want to reach out. It's greglopez.me, M-E, as in that's who I am, me. I also have upcoming courses that I'm slowly creating, but are not in the works yet, have not been released yet, but are in the works, that you can find at stoicmissingpieces.com, which will have targeted kind of like intermediate level Stoic courses. They're not going to be general introductions. And I do have, if you're just interested in general introductions, I have recommendations for books as well as other courses that I think do a great job of that. But that's where I am. So I guess my personal website and also you can go to New York City Stoics on meetup.com. My meetups for New York City Stoics are online, and they will be for the foreseeable future, because actually I found a lot of people who were coming to my groups were outside of New York City, and so I'm going to be keeping them on Zoom. But there's limitations to the video chats. I think live chats with videos still is more human than going on a Facebook forum or something. But it still is limited because you can't have back and forth and conversation with people when there's over like 8 people in a Zoom call. And so I also do in-person meetups in New York City Stoics where it's more conversational, or at least that's the aim, where I hopefully get to sit back and people can actually talk with each other about Stoicism rather than me kind of give a mini lecture, which is semi-forced by the limits of the technology. So it's on meetup.com, and you just search meetup.com for New York City Stoics, and that'll be
so glad it's there. Gregory, it's been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everyone tuning in, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube. And see you next time for another trip down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.